In terms of agenda today, we'll briefly introduce the team, talk about the background and the current state, discuss the process, kind of our next steps, and then finally some conclusions. So who are we? Starting from left to right here, Adam Moses is our senior informatics analyst for both the Department of Internal Medicine and the Center for Healthcare Innovation for the Wake Forest School of Medicine. Mr. Paul Yelton is our IT program director, a full stack developer with the Center for Healthcare Innovation at Wake Forest School of Medicine. Both of these guys are amazing at what they do. Myself, I'm the Vice Chair of Informatics and Analytics for the Department of Internal Medicine at the Wake Forest School of Medicine, board certified in informatics and a practicing general internist. In terms of the Department of Internal Medicine's Informatics and Analytics mission, ultimately we aim to advance the idea of the academic learning health system by mobilizing and visualizing EHR data in support of healthcare delivery, generating data needed to advance evidence-based practices, and promoting interprofessional and cross-departmental collaborations, one of which is demonstrated in this project. In terms of the Wake Forest Center for Healthcare Innovation, just some context. This center accelerates the translation of medical discoveries into healthcare systems in order to increase efficiency, improve patient outcomes, ultimately moving those innovations into the clinical environment by streamlining translation to processes, service lines, personnel, and digital health expertise and funding. They are integrating findings from published research. They are evaluating, testing, and applying new ideas and addressing healthcare systems, not just products, to improve patient outcomes and experiences. In terms of the context of this particular presentation, there was a Parent R01 grant where a multi-site randomized controlled trial demonstrated that the Empath CRC app doubled the proportion of patients screened for colorectal cancer. The current grant, the parent grant, is conducting a hybrid implementation effectiveness trial of Empath in 28 community-based clinics, where we are conducting qualitative research with clinical staff and administrators to determine the best way to integrate into clinical workflows. We spent 9 months at the beginning of the grant to convert the app from a standalone iPad app that was not EHR connected to one that is fully integrated with Wake Forest Epic EHR. That was a result of the qualitative analysis around what staff and administrators wanted and needed. We used a basic or PAX launch mechanism with embedded parameters on launch because that was the tech available at the time. We leveraged legacy encryption, authentication, and authorization paradigms. We received a NIH Office of Data Science and Strategy administrative supplement to ultimately develop robust, sustainable, and cloud-ready research software through the migration of the current technical architecture to an interoperable Smart on FHIR app launch and taking those EHR integrated components of the application to the cloud. So our specific aims are listed here. The first specific aim was to enhance the application's interoperability and decrease vendor-specific dependencies by leveraging web services and Smart on FHIR. Our second specific aim was to migrate the CRC application from a containerized on-premise architecture to a service-agnostic cloud-based architecture. And finally, to validate the interoperable aspects through rigorous testing. Interoperable and cloud-based aspects. In the current state, and just prior to COVID, we had over 15,000 patients use Empath and identified over 1,100, here you can see 1,240 patients who are overdue for colorectal cancer screening by a mean of over 10 years. While we're experiencing success at our local level, our ability to scale and disseminate was limited by some of the legacy technical architecture, especially the interoperable aspects of the software for open science. At this point, I'll turn it over to Mr. Adam Moses to walk through the process.
Thank you, Dr. Dharod. Just kind of a brief approach that we use to convert these mechanisms from the basic launch to a Smart on FHIR. We were looking to use R4 when available for all the existing APIs. When we didn't, we were using the DSTU3 or even in some instances the DSTU2s. We created a new button in our Wake Forest Epic environment to actually launch this Smart on FHIR application. And then we were using some custom programming to perform that handshake methodology to actually authorize the client. Pulling from the HL7's website, when you're looking at Smart on FHIR, this is what we were aiming to do. You have your EHR session, you're connecting to an external application. which then goes over to an EHR FHIR server, and it also connects to the authorization server. There's lots of moving pieces here. Trying to get all this working is a little more difficult than it actually looks on this screen. In terms of our actual process, we're looking at converting from the PACS launch mechanism, as Dr. Dharod mentioned, to a smart launch. We wanted to reduce the dependency on the proprietary EHR APIs, and we were not able to actually go fully FHIR-based. Multiple calls were FHIR APIs, but some did not fulfill the needs that we were looking for. And at this point, I'll pass it over to Mr. Yelton to talk about how we figured out which APIs to use and kind of where to go from here.
Thanks, Adam. So for our API selection process, we've come up with this heuristic diagram to understand the needs of each API that we would need to implement. And this approach allows us to scrutinize the cost-benefit analysis of whether to implement a proprietary API call or a FHIR-based open interoperable resource. And this guide is really just a general guideline for how we do that selection process. You will note that there is a custom web service box in the lower right-hand corner of the diagram. We try to avoid this at all costs because that really hinders your ability to become truly interoperable with your applications. And so at this time, we actually have no custom web services employed within our environment. So once we kind of go through the process of which way we approach the API implementation, we try to utilize as many FHIR APIs as we could, specifically around the patient resource FHIR item and observation, specifically looking around encounters and provider information. Using this FHIR call reduced the need for us to make multiple API calls under the hood with the EHR's proprietary existing APIs, essentially saving us a bunch of round trips with the network traffic and improving efficiency of the custom application that we built. Additionally, there are some items that we were using that are not readily available, such as health maintenance records, but we are hopeful in future versions of FHIR resources that those items become available. And then lastly, there are some specific EHR API endpoints for inserting data back into the medical record that were not accessible through FHIR resources that we had to continue to utilize as existing pathways. So as Adam alluded to earlier in the presentation, this has been a challenge moving forward. And this is pretty typical, I would say, of most large enterprise implementations of custom software solutions. Lots of things around server configuration. So making sure that your OAuth response endpoints are whitelisted and accessible to the appropriate servers. We have multiple FHIR test endpoints set up that allow us to provide different testing. And so just figuring out which FHIR server we should use. And then probably the biggest constraint is people time. So as a large academic medical center, we have lots of stuff going on. And so coordinating efforts between our business analysts, our network analysts, our software engineers to come up with this solution and implement it has been challenging. And so once we get all those together, then we have a good working group and collaboration to implement a solution. So where we're at now, we're in process of finalizing our implementation and conversion, which will do rigorous testing, not only through the application, but we'll also go through our ITS EHR analyst testing process. And then once we're satisfied that we have thoroughly tested, we'll deploy to production, and hopefully our end users that are actually using the application currently will notice no difference other than a different button that they have to click. So overall, it's been a very enlightening experience to transition to open resources such as the FHIR. And this really sets us up for scale in the future. So as we continue to think about the roadmap for this specific application, implementing the Smart on Launch feature allows us to provide new updates without having to do a very extensive integration within our existing EHR infrastructure. This also will allow us to provide better reach and scale throughout our enterprise for more use, and it helps automate additional attributes or elements or data items that we want to include within our application in the future. Appreciate your time, and now we will take some questions.
Thank you, Paul. You all can see our contact information here for Mr. Adam Moses, Mr. Paul Yelton, and myself.
Thank you very much, Adam Moses, Ajay Dharod, and Paul Yelton. Welcome everyone to this porting from basic to smart on FHIR launch presentation. I'm Sadhana Langar, HL7's Director of Education. And at this time, I'm going to ask the speakers are here to answer your questions. And I see that questions have come up. And I'm going to ask Adam, AJ, and Paul to answer the questions.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. So we see a couple of questions. Maybe we could start with what motivated your decision to migrate the Smart on FHIR app hosting from on-premise containers to cloud-based? So great question. There's almost two parallel processes here. There's an on-premise version that is fully EHR integrated, that has all of the API connections, the authorization, authentication, and encryption paradigms embedded, and it is on-premise. We, in parallel, have a cloud-based version that is maybe less EHR connected, but informed by EHR data, that is a more scalable solution for any potential additional health systems that may be interested in implementing this sort of software. So I think that should answer that question by Joe. Let's see. What other questions do we have here?
The next one would be, is resource persistence an issue for this app? I'll have to defer to Paul on that. Paul, can you respond to that?
Yes, we actually haven't ran into any issues with the resource persistence at this time, fortunately.
And I think David Simons had a question, maybe I missed it, was opening up the EMR to cloud-based smart apps not a concern? So that is very much a concern. David, I think you asked a very relevant question, kind of articulated those two pathways. I do imagine that through, how do I describe this? The right authorization, authentication, and encryption paradigms in the future, we will be able to take the cloud-based version and make it truly EHR connected. That is yet to come. There are examples of other applications that are in the industry that do have that ability to connect directly from the EHR to the cloud. We have not yet gone down that pathway, but I imagine that is on the roadmap. Great question, David. Let's see if there's any other questions.
Don't see any at the moment.
Any other question? Going once, going twice, going three times. Okay, I think that's it. You answered all the three questions, right?
I
Yes.
think so.
Yes.
I'm happy to hang out for a few more moments if there's others, if folks are typing them in or have other questions.
Okay. Meanwhile, thank you so much, Adam, AJ, and Paul. Thank you so much. Go ahead.
If I could have time for one more question. This is, Joe, a follow-up to the migration of hosting.
Yeah.
If you were going to have the Smart on FHIR app hosted on the cloud, does your organization have extra privacy and security concerns about putting the data out there? And how did you address that?
Yeah, well, they would, and it would be, as has been with other applications that are enterprise-wide, it would be kind of a detailed review of the data that would be transferred, the use cases around it, is there value, and kind of just a general risk benefit analysis around, does the application provide enough value that the risk of having EHR data or EHR connectivity versus the value, does it make sense? Of course, there would be requirements around security and privacy paradigms in terms of where is the data stored? How is it transmitted? Is there a VPN tunnel? So lots of questions there, Joe, that would need to be answered before I think we would be able to actually take the cloud-based version and connect it to the electronic health record. Does that answer your question, Joe?
Yeah, thanks.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I will add that one thing that we really try to do when we develop applications is not actually store the data within the app itself. So it's merely a pass-through to do the processing and the visualization in the moment, and then it just continues on later on. So it's just essentially a quick proxy turnaround of the data within the application itself. And we would establish VPN tunnels and all that fun stuff that you would for appropriate security with the app.
That's right. Thank you, Paul. That's a very good point. As much as possible to be able to not store the data or store the minimum necessary data is a key component as you consider the technical components of the design as it relates to any clinical care. Sometimes it is a negotiation of some of the data needs to be stored. And so having that conversation with your security and privacy leaders at the institution to share with them why the data needs to be housed or stored versus what can be wrapped up in a visualization and then purged is valuable. Thank you again, Paul. Joe, thank you for your question. That's really a relevant question.
Thank you.
Speakers, any other questions or any other closing comments?
We just wanted to give a big shout out. Epic has been a tremendous help when it comes to doing some of this stuff. I see Isaac's on the line. So Isaac, thank you. It's been extremely helpful to work with them and be able to utilize their expertise to get some of this stuff done.
Yes, that relationship is an important thing.
There is a comment from David in chat, if you all want to look at it. And if that's it, we can end the now.
I may not see that comment.
Okay.
Savannah, can you?
Paradigm shift.
Oh, yes. Thank you. A paradigm shift. Yes. Yes, indeed. And so I think our collective voice can help shift that paradigm. And it will shift ultimately in my belief system. Great. Well, I think we're at 1:19, so 1 minute to spare. Thank you so much, everyone. Namaste. Have a wonderful rest of FHIR Dev Days.
Namaste to you too, Ajay. Thanks, Paul and Adam. Thank you all so much. Thanks, everyone, for joining us. And please don't forget to rate this session. This is Sadhana Alangar, HL7's Director of Education, signing off. Bye, everyone.